you get a really solid workout in 25 to 30 minutes. That is going to do more for your body than the 45 to 60 minutes. And it's really, really hard for so many women in this age bracket to wrap their heads around, because we have grown up in the whole step aerobics and 90-minute fat burning classes and more is better. But we look from a physiological and hormonal response, it's not better.
Hello, my Betties, and welcome to another episode, a very special episode of the Better Podcast. It's me, your host, Dr. Stephanie Estima. Today, I am joined by Stacy Sims. She has been by far one of your most requested guests on the show, and you asked, Betty, and here we are delivering. So, Stacy Sims, in case you have not heard of who she is, she's an international exercise physiologist and nutrition scientist with an MSc, master's, and a PhD. Dedicated to enhancing exercise nutrition and performance for women. Her research at Stanford, the Auckland University of Technology, and the University of Waikato emphasizes female athlete health. As the author of Roar, she explores sex differences in training and nutrition, a topic discussed in her TED Talk, Women Are Not Small Men. With over 100 peer-reviewed publications, she's an established expert in her field. Currently, Stacy is a senior research assistant at Sprints AUT, which is the Sports Performance Research Institute in New Zealand, and she's focused on optimizing human health, well-being, and physical performance. She also holds an adjunct position with Stanford Lifestyle Medicine Group, supervising PhD students and advising companies. So, what did we talk about today in our conversation? Well, we talked about cardiovascular exercise, which types, the differentiation between intensities, and why perimenopausal, menopausal, and menstruating women want to understand the difference between all of them and which one we should be applying based on where we are in the arc of our lives. We also talked about strength training. We talked about the difference between a strength outcome versus a hypertrophy outcome and which ones we want to be thinking about for optimal health in perimenopause and menopause. We talked about nutrient timing. So when do we have the carbs? When do we have the proteins? How can we heal our relationship with carbohydrates? What are some supplements that every woman should be taking? And again, how those change across the menstrual cycle, how those change in perimenopause and menopause. The one thing I will say was there's so many beautiful little tangents that we went on. There are, as we were talking, so many synchronicities, so many parallels in our teachings. And I think that you are going to find this conversation incredibly helpful. If you are familiar with any of my work, this is going to absolutely reinforce it. Stacy has a wonderful way of teaching. She's very clearly has seen many, many clients. So she is a very, very good teacher, very good at explaining often very difficult concepts. And so I think that you're really going to get a lot out of this episode. So please enjoy my conversation with Stacy Sims. Stacy, I am just tickled to welcome you to the Better Show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. This is going to be fun.
It is going to be fun, and it is very much long overdue, and I'm really excited by it. Lots of different pillars I want to cover today, but I wanted to start with cardiovascular exercise for women in midlife. Mm-hmm. I love the content that you put out as it relates to cardiovascular exercise. Before we kind of get into the particulars of HIIT training and intervals and plyos, maybe we can just start with why does it matter how women are looking at cardio in perimenopause and menopause?
Cardio training, especially if we're looking at the intensity of cardio training, can have variable hormonal responses. And it is a stress. People forget that when you're exercising, you're putting your body under stress, and we get fitter from the recovery. So when we're looking at the peri and postmenopausal post-exercise responses, we want to invoke a stress during exercise that's going to have a positive response in those adaptations, like an increase in growth hormone, increase in testosterone, which then over time reduce cortisol so we don't have as much cortisol peak and trough. And when we're looking at why we want to really examine the intensity of cardio work is we have been ingrained in this idea of long, slow distance or calories in, calories out. You have to spend an hour of like sweating and trying to cane yourself. And when we look, that really low intensity stuff is good for mental health, but not so much for cardiovascular. And when we're looking at that moderate to high intensity, where we've all been conditioned that that's how we're supposed to feel after a cardio session, completely smashed, that intensity isn't quite right to get the adaptations we want.
Yeah, I remember just the sort of attitude of if there isn't a bucket nearby, then you haven't worked hard enough, right? If you're not vomiting after, with the intensity, then you just haven't done it right? Okay, so let's actually define intensity, because I know you and I both speak about, I always say, like, please don't write me letters, but I always talk about Orange Theory and F45 and these classes where it seems intense, but maybe not quite in the physiological way that you're describing. So let's actually just put some definitions around what we're talking about when we're talking about intensity. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, I've gotten letters about the F45 and Orange Theory, even from the companies themselves, trying to understand what we're talking about. Yeah. So when we're looking at those kinds of classes, and it's not just those two particular areas, but it's all the gym type classes that are now being marketed to women 40 plus or in the midlife, where you think, okay, I'm going to go for an hour, I'm going to smash myself, and it's using some weight. So maybe I'm getting some strength training and I'm increasing my heart rate. But when we're looking at it, you cannot hold the appropriate intensity for that hour. Because when we're looking at the scale of intensity, we have the zone 1, which is kind of the resting, really low, just walking, really kind of dog walking, leisurely style. And then we have the zone 2 that everyone talks about, where you can hold it and your breath is elevated. And we say that's around the 60% heart rate max. Then we get into this moderate intensity, which a lot of people are like, oh, zone 3, zone 4. And this is where we say it is too hard to be easy to get the adaptations we want from those lower intensities, but it's too easy to be hard to get the adaptations we want from the higher zones. So we're in this moderate, and it doesn't really do much for us when we get to our midlife. If we are looking to train for something that we are doing that's more endurance, like a 10K run or something like that, you might have to spend time there. But for general fitness, that intensity makes you feel smashed, and it is a very strong metabolic and central nervous system stress. But it isn't a high enough threat, as we say, to the entire system to invoke a change of let's make ourselves really super robust to that stress. When we're in peri and postmenopause, we need that upper end and that really significant lower end. Because now we're trying to find an external stress from exercise that's going to signal the body to adapt how hormones used to support. So we're looking at metabolic control, we're looking at brain health, we're looking at cardiovascular and blood pressure combinations. We're looking at how we're invoking muscle regeneration and muscle growth and the conversation to reduce visceral fat and reduce the body fat accumulation. If we stay in that moderate intensity zone, we don't have a strong enough stress to invoke those signals. And that's why we see so many problems when women are like, but I go to Orange Theory 4 times a week, or I do F45, or I go to Barry's boot camp, and I'm not getting any results. I'm just getting really tired, and I'm tired but wired, and I just don't know what to do.
And it's, we're calling out companies, but this could also just be jogging on the treadmill 4 to 5 times a week. It could be on the Stairmaster or the elliptical or the, on in your spin class at your local gym as well. So these are areas where, and I would love for you to maybe expand on this a little bit. That zone 3, 4 tends to be a bit more catabolic, right? Because you're just using up glycogen, like muscle glycogen. But when you're in that zone, those higher, even the polar ends, so zone 1 and even zone 2 and then zone 5, and then some people will even argue that there's a zone 6, but we'll just, for the argument, just say that there's a zone 5 right now. Those are anabolic, right? So there's zone 1 and 2 are very much recovery. So I never get very hungry after a walk or after cleaning up my kitchen or even just, a light light, like a brisk walk in the neighborhood, a weighted vest, that kind of thing. And the same is true when I am doing high intensity interval training. I'm not really hungry afterwards. Whereas when I do find, and I will, with the spirit of transparency and honesty, there is a step class that I really, because I am a step, like I grew up, teaching
With
steps.
step aerobics, yeah,
Step aerobics.
yeah.
So I love. It's like I just have so much fun doing it, and I know I'm in like zone 3 and 4. But I'm hungry. Like I know, I always notice I'm like just a little hungrier after that class. It doesn't quell my hunger, the way that maybe a zone 1, 2, weighted vest walk might. So I think that it's also important to also distinguish the different outcomes on the body as you've been describing. But one is more catabolic, which is at 3, 4. And then we tend to, as you're saying, like we tend to drive up cortisol, and this like elevated cortisol, sort of chronically elevated inflammatory, well, I guess chronically it's inflammatory, can drive up the belly weight and the things that women will often complain about in midlife. Like, I don't know where I'm working out 5 days a week. I don't know why I have this midsection that won't budge.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I'll be full disclosure too. I still love going out and riding my bike for hours at a time. Right. Or doing bike intervals that are a little bit longer than what a sprint interval would be. But I don't do it all the time. And I'm sure you don't do your step aerobics all the time. So there is a time and a place. It's just people shouldn't put all their eggs in that one basket, because we do have to think about, the soul food and all the things that make people happy. But when we're looking at the quality, we want to really look at quality over quantity. So people are also stressed for time, and they're like, well, I need to go fit this class in, or I need to go jump on the bike or go for a run or something like that. And so they're really stressed, or I have to do it for 45 minutes. But if you were to look at the quality and really focus on the proper polarizing intensity of 1 minute on, 2 minutes off, or something to that effect, you get a really solid workout in 25 to 30 minutes. That is going to do more for your body than the 45 to 60 minutes. And it's really, really hard for so many women in this age bracket to wrap their heads around, because we have grown up in the whole step aerobics and 90-minute fat burning classes and more is better. But we look from a physiological and hormonal response, it's not better. It's let's look at the quality and the intensity to get the responses that we want that doesn't overdrive our sympathetic nervous system and make us in that tired but wired state.
Yeah, it's the dose, right? It's the dose. It's the dose that makes the poison. It's like,
Exactly.
You can have a slice of cake and you'll be fine. If you have the whole cake, you're not going to be fine,
Right.
So, okay, so let's talk about high intensity interval training. So let's define that. So when we're thinking about that, is that a function of maximum heart rate? How are you defining high intensity? Is it like Norwegians? Is it like the 4x4s? Is it Tabata? How do you like to look at high intensity training?
High intensity and sprint interval are two different things. Like sprint interval training is within high intensity interval training. And it's really hard to use heart rate if we're looking at specific intervals for some people, because there's a lag in the time it takes for the metrics to be caught by a wearable. I like to use rating of perceived exertion. And people can kind of more understand when I say on a scale of 1 to 10 for high intensity interval training. For the intervals, we want you to be working about an 8. And that interval could be anywhere from 1 to 6 minutes. And then when the recovery time is variable as well, are we looking for more lactate production? Maybe we're doing 8 at 4 to 5 minutes. Are we looking at more power-based stuff? Maybe we're doing 1 minute that's at closer to a 9. So the intensity in there and the variable recovery is what makes the metabolic outcomes. When we're looking at sprint interval training, this is a completely different and a subset of high intensity interval training. So sprint interval training is 30 seconds or less, as hard as you possibly can go. So on the scale of 1 to 10, you might be 10 or 11. And then the recovery is 2 to 4 minutes, because we're looking for complete metabolic and central nervous system recovery, because it is a really maximal stress on the body. And you might only be able to do 2 to 3 when you first start. And ideally, you don't want to do more than 6. So there is that subset, and both of them are very effective at changing body comp, but they do it in different mechanisms in different ways. So we're looking at high intensity interval training, which is a little bit less intense and has variable recovery. This is more of a a conversation that we're getting better blood pressure control because we're having more shear stress on the blood vessels. We are having more myokines released from the skeletal muscle to say, hey, we don't need to store visceral fat. We're also producing lactate, which is a preferred fuel for the brain. So we are able to help with the brain metabolism misstep that's occurring in perimenopause. When we look specifically at sprint interval training, this is a very strong stress that will cause more of an epigenetic response over time, where we're actually changing the way that the muscle fiber is responding. We're able to use more ATP CP. We're able to generate more of what we call our GLUT4 proteins, which are kind of like the doors that open without insulin to pull glucose in. So we get better glucose homeostasis over time. And both of them are very effective at shutting down that visceral fat gain.
Amazing. Okay, so just for the listener, ATP-CP is the ATP cross-creatine phosphocreatine system. So this is this is the energy that's often reserved in the muscle for very high intensity, the sprint interval training that Stacy is describing here as well. And so let's do, if you can give maybe an example of high tech and low tech. If someone has maybe access to a gym, what would be a piece of equipment that they might think about doing high intensity interval training on? Is there a preferred? Is it a stationary bike? Is it a treadmill? Do you care? Do you care if it's weight bearing or non-weight bearing? Or if someone doesn't have access to a gym, would it be just finding like a local high school with a track and seeing, timing yourself and seeing how much distance you can cover?
It's really dependent on the individual because there are some people who hate running, and then there are some people who absolutely love it. And then there are joint issues that come into play, especially when we start getting into perimenopause. So it's whatever mode of activity that will allow you to hit those intensities. If we're in a gym situation for sprint interval training, I really like people to use an assault bike because it's really hard and it has a good timer and you feel it, or a rowing erg because then it's a total body as well. Treadmill is harder because you have to get it up to speed and you have to be very comfortable running super fast and then being able to jump off, which isn't that safe. So I prefer using an erg that gives you more control over it and also monitors power. If we're outside and you don't run, it could be stairs. You're really pushing to get up the stairs a lot faster. It could be walking up an incline. If you have access to kettlebell or something like that in your garage, you can use kettlebell overhead swings or snatch as your high intensity work. We can even look at battle ropes either at your house or at the gym because those also can really invoke a total body high intensity interval as well. So it really does depend on where you are and what you have available and what you find you can maximally put forth the effort without hurting yourself or getting mentally like, I can't do this.
And frequency so high intensity interval training, how often are you looking to do that? And would you categorize sprint interval training as a subcategory of HIIT, of high intensity interval training? And if yes, how many times would you like people to be doing that per week or biweekly?
Yeah, so sprint interval, maybe twice a week. And then with one high intensity interval session. But if you're like, the sprint's too hard right now, I can't get to that intensity, I'm not robust enough, that's fine. Then we look to doing 2 of the high intensity interval trainings that are a little bit lower in the intensity with that variable recovery.
Great. And let's talk about zone 2. So lots of bros will say, love to talk about zone 2, which is fine. I love the word that you used before. Did you say soul food? Is that what you used for? Okay. So soul food, it's great. Why do you think that women are different in terms of how often we should be doing zone 2? So the recommendation for zone 2, if I'm getting my numbers right, and I'm happy to fact check myself for the show notes, but I believe it's somewhere between 150 and 180 minutes per week of I think it's cardiovascular training in general, but generally the zone 2 training, that's the number that I often hear thrown around. Do you agree with that? Do you think it should be less than that, more than that, and why?
Pull it back to sex differences at birth. Okay, so we have to understand that we don't have enough research to go beyond the binary XXXY. So when I'm talking about sex differences at birth, I'm talking about XX versus XY. So we see that girls and boys are born differently with different muscle morphology, so the types of muscle fibers. Women are born with more of those endurant oxidative fibers, not the type 2 glycolytic, but more of our type 1 slow twitch. With that also comes better mitochondria density, better mitochondrial capabilities of regenerating and stopping oxidative and inflammatory responses. We also have more of the proteins in the mitochondria that help pull in and use free fatty acids. So when we start going through our life and we get through puberty, when we get into our reproductive years, we also have estrogen that enhances mitochondrial capabilities and ability to pull in free fatty acids and use it. We get to perimenopause and postmenopause when estrogen drops off. We revert back to those sex differences. When we look at the endurant fibers, we still have that mitochondrial density and mitochondrial function more so than men. So when we're looking at why people do zone 2, it's to improve mitochondrial health, and it's to improve metabolic flexibility, or the ability to use more free fatty acids and switch between glucose and free fatty acids. Women, by the way of being born XX, are already more metabolically flexible, and becomes very apparent when we're in our reproductive years because estrogen and progesterone fluctuation change our metabolic flexibility regardless of what we're doing. So when we're looking at all the recommendations of why people should be doing zone 2, it doesn't hold water for female physiology. Because when we're looking at increasing the ability to burn free fatty acids and improve mitochondrial function and health and to improve metabolic flexibility, women are already there. So I tell men that they should do it to become more like women, because women are more endurant, more robust, have more antioxidative and anti-inflammatory properties by the nature of how robust their mitochondria are. When we talk about zone 2 and how often you should do it, I always tell women, look, we will have a limited amount of time during the week. If you have all the time in the world, go ahead, do all the zone 2 stuff, but put that second, do your strength training and your intensity work first. For people who are endurance athletes and training up for something, we have to factor that zone 2 in. We have to factor in some of the moderate intensity because that's the kind of training we need to be successful at whatever endurance event we're doing. But for general population, it becomes an additional stress. Where women are like, I have to get the zone 2 in, yet I have to do these sprints and I have to do strength training. I don't know what I'm doing or how do I fit it in, and it becomes too confusing. So when I bring it back down to the basic physiology and why we're doing certain things, I tell women, look, we want to do the high intensity because we don't have a lot of those glycolytic type 2 fibers, and we lose them as we age. And there's a very strong rationale for trying to maintain and build that. And that has to do with brain health, because we see there's a sex difference in the onset of Alzheimer's and dementia. And there's a precipitous change in brain metabolism in perimenopause when we have a drop in estrogen. And that becomes a misstep in glucose metabolism. The preferred fuel of the brain is lactate. So if we're able to produce more lactate and maintain those fibers that produce lactate, then we're also providing a fuel for the brain. And the brain is like, oh, okay. And so we get rid of that risk factor of brain metabolism misstep and a risk factor for cognitive decline. So when we look at zone 2, that pathway doesn't happen for the brain. So that's the big overview of all of it.
Yeah, no, and it's so useful because I even see this when my husband and I will train together. We don't train together every day, but there's a couple days where we have our schedules sync up and we go to the gym together. And when we're training legs, I can get back. So my rest time is much less than his. So we can do whatever it is, a Bulgarian split, whatever it is we're doing, deadlifts, like whatever we're doing for leg day that day. And I can get back at it after about call it 90 seconds a minute. And he still needs another 2-3 minutes to recover. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a function of the concentration of type 1 fibers that you're describing versus these type 2. And of course, the exercise itself is more of a type 2 fiber activity. But I think that that perfusion, that blood perfusion, and that oxidative capacity, of course, that I have that maybe he doesn't, is because of the difference in concentration in muscle fiber type. So and the one thing I forgot to ask you that I'll come back to now as we're sort of wrapping up this cardiovascular conversation, mention type 1 now as being, and you've mentioned this already, oxidative. This is like the type 1 fibers, as you like, it's walking, it's sort of puttering around the house, it's maybe a weighted vest, it's a lighter activity. These are using these type 1 fibers, which are going through this process of beta oxidation and using either fat from dietary fat or stored fat in the body. And the type 2 fibers, we have 2A and 2B. And what we've been talking about with the sprint interval and the high intensity interval is really, I guess, age dependent, training up your type 2B fibers, because then you sort of peak. And then as we're moving into our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s and beyond, it's about trying to slow down the degradation of these type 2B fibers. And the sprint intervals, I mean, they're uncomfortable. Like psychologically, I get agitated. I know that it's coming up on my schedule and I'm like, oh my God, it's going to be terrible. But the practical application of that is like your reflexes, right? So you misstep on some stairs, or you trip on a corner of a carpet, or your grandsons or whoever's Lego that are all around, and you can catch yourself right before you fall.
Yep.
So there's many, I mean, that's one sort of, everyday application that women are like, tell me why I need to do this again. It's like, so you don't fall and potentially break a hip. Like when we're postmenopause, and we're going to talk about hormones today as well. But as you've already pointed out, we lose estrogens when we go through the menopausal transition, and our risk for everything, cardiovascular, everything goes up. Your fragility of your bones go up. The density of your bones go down if you're not being strategic and doing some of the things that we're talking about here. So just wanted to sort of wrap that in a bow a little bit. For your zone 2, your soul food, how often are you doing it? And then maybe the better question is, how often do you recommend a perimenopausal woman should be engaging in zone 2 activity?
Yeah, I do it on Saturday mornings with friends on our mountain bikes. And for people who are looking for their soul food outtake, I don't want to take away community. So 2 times maybe would be a max that I would recommend when we're looking at time constraints around it. Yeah, so a lot of women will say, I'm going to go do this long, slow thing on the weekend with friends. And I don't want to take that away from anybody. Yeah. But don't feel like you have to get up at 5 a.m. to go do a 90-minute walk or run or something like that at zone 2, because it's not that beneficial. Sleep is better.
So I'm keeping my 10 a.m. step class on Sundays. That's what I'm hearing.
Perfect. Yes, yeah. Exactly.
But, I love what you're saying too. I mean, you mentioned something, we'll just go on a little tangent. I think that community is such a big deal. Like it's honestly the step class, or even, the pickleball that I engage in, it's like literally a proxy for getting together with people that I love and like having a good time together. Like I know all the people that go to the step class. We have a little, it's just a lovely, I mean, the step class is sort of like the thing that brings us all together, but it's so much fun. And I think for women, I mean, I spent many years just thinking I could do it all by myself and I didn't need anyone and all this sort of silly, maybe trauma thinking, and have really come in my 40s to understand that, yeah, I really do need people and I thrive. The right people, I really become a better person because I have the privilege of having these people and letting these people into my life. So I love what you said about I don't want to take community away from people. I think that's such an important thing,
And it also helps drive physical activity, because you want to show up for your friends and you want to have that conversation. And if you go and you're not feeling that great, you'll still get a massive boost from being with your friends. And I think in today's environment where everything is a bit toxic and negative, that the more that we can support each other and be with our friends, the much better for mental health, which then leads to better physical health.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that you can look at all the centenarians and super centenarians around the world. And you could make a comment about, genes, and they have FOXO gene. You can make all these different arguments, but the one thing that they all have is a very strong sense of community. They all are revered in their, with their status as elders. They're not shipped off to
assisted living.
Yeah, assisted living, and
Yeah.
they're integrated with the family. They're the matriarchs or the patriarchs of the family. Like, it's a wonderful thing. So, yeah, I think and I've had people on the show talking about like the loneliness epidemic and how that really does affect our health. And we don't think it, and I never thought, I was like, oh, okay, whatever. I'm like, I don't have many friends, but fine. And I could not survive with other people in my life. We really are hardwired. We're hardwired to be with other people.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's our first little tangent. So I wanted to make sure that we talk about strength training. This is something that you and I have a lot of similarities in. And just in studying your work, one of the things that I've noticed, we slightly different, but also still parallel. I noticed that you talk a lot about so there's a couple different outcomes when you're weight training. So there can be hypertrophy, which is muscle size and growth. There can be strength and power, and often they're corollary with each other. Like often when you have more muscle size, you are stronger. But the reverse is not always true, but they're often corollary, right? So I thought we could start off with a couple of, again, some definitions in terms of what is strength training or power training and what is the difference. Let's contrast that with hypertrophy training.
Mm-hmm. So resistance training on a whole is pulling a load that is greater than what you normally would. So that's the basis of it. When we look at the power-based end of things, that's the 0 to 6 or 7 reps at around 80% or more of your one repetition maximum. And it is more of a central nervous system drive factor. So it's really recruiting muscle fibers, and we're priming the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system to be able to have really fast nerve conduction, to stimulate muscle fibers to cohesively contract quickly to be able to lift a heavy load. When we look at the hypertrophy end of things, this is where we're looking at reps of 10 plus. And we can also talk about 10 plus to failure. And the goal of the hypertrophy is to stimulate a metabolic stress that will rip or break down the muscle fiber. And then it responds, or the body responds, by building that muscle fiber back as well as more, because the body now is like, oh, I need to have more muscle fibers to be able to overcome the stress of this longer duration load lifting. So when we're looking at the whole spectrum of things, it never really is one or the other, because if you are doing hypertrophy training, one of the first adaptations that women have when they first start strength training is a neuromuscular response, right? So it's not exclusive. When we start focusing on the heavier loads versus the reps to failure, that's where we start to get this discrepancy, especially when we're talking about it in strength and conditioning research, or we're looking at it from a social media perspective where women should strength train all the way through their life, but what does that mean? And what does that look like? So when I talk about the heavier end of loads, it's when we're hitting perimenopause and looking at the very first thing that goes. The very first thing that women will talk about losing is strength and power. You'll have people who are like, well, 6 months ago, I could run a 7:30 pace, and now I can't even hit a 9. But they haven't lost muscle mass. They've just lost the strength and power and the economic ability to run faster. And so when we start looking in and digging into the physiology, we see that estrogen is really tightly tied to myosin phosphorylation. So myosin and actin are two binding contractile proteins. And myosin will bond to actin in a very strong sense to create a strong contraction. When we start losing estrogen, we stop getting the stimulus for a very tight bond. And this is why we start to feel like we're not as strong or as powerful. We see this happening before we lose lean mass. So when we're talking about perimenopause and trying to maintain more corium of performance, we talk about let's lift heavy on the heavier end so that we can keep that phosphorylation of the myosin and keep that strong muscle contraction, but not because we're producing more estrogen, but because we now have a very strong central nervous system response that then builds down to the peripheral response to say, hey, we need myosin to really connect with actin in a very strong bond to be able to have a very strong muscle contraction to lift this load. And at the same time, you will get lean mass development. We see in the research that when you start to lose the strength and power, you also start to lose the quality of the muscle fiber and get more cell death, which is what leads to the lean mass loss. So this is the contention point when we start talking about women who are perimenopausal plus and the types of strength training we should do. But the caveat is people who do not have a history in strength training shouldn't immediately go to the heavy loads because it is a journey. It takes time to learn how to lift heavy properly. So when I first start coming out saying you should lift heavy, it's because I'm already working with and within an active population who has a history of strength training. But for women who are just starting the strength training journey, let's look at how you move first. And then we start adding some load. We want to go 10 or more, maybe to failure to start getting that neuromuscular response and building some muscle. And then we can periodize into heavier lifting and getting that really good response and adaptation that doesn't require estrogen.
I'm so happy you said that. Thank you so much for saying that. I think that is such a, it's so obvious that you've worked with so many women before. I wrote an article for Mind Body Green not too recently around this. It's like especially for perimenopausal women, like I'm 47. So I grew up in the cardio section of the gym. I was a step bunny. I was teaching step. I was doing Taibo. I was doing all the things like on the elliptical. So I grew up in the cardio section of the gym. And now we have this shift from being like a cardio bunny to being a muscle mommy, right? So we have this like we want to be swole, we want to get jacked, I want to get jacked. I know that everybody doesn't want to get jacked, but I want to get jacked. But we want to build muscle, okay? So now we have this scenario where you have a woman who has been, 1,200 calories. And I see this all the time in the clinic, like 1,200 calories. She's doing 4 to 5 cardio sessions per week. And now we're moving that woman over and she's like, okay, now I'm going to do a deadlift. Like what? So there's no motor patterning. There's no control. Mm-hmm. She doesn't have that mind muscle connection. So I love that you're saying that because that puts her, if she's just listening to little snippets on social media and not listening or reading, your book or listening to a long form podcast like this, not understanding the nuance of actually you need to develop the motor pattern first. Mm-hmm. Your technique must come first. And that's going to come at lighter loads. We're going to check the ego at the door of the gym. That's the enemy in the gym is your ego. And you're going to get the technique right before you progress. And then we can eventually progress you to these strength ranges, which I love. And I think we all should be doing because it's, it not only builds strength, but it's also going to help maintain bone density and some of these other things that you're describing, right? If we're doing these strength ranges, we're going to maintain that integrity for the myocyte to continue to the myosin and the actin to continue contracting in the way that you've described.
Yes, exactly. And I don't like the clickbait that's out there. Like people are just headlining and getting more and more polarized. Because then it creates this massive confusion. And then you'll have other people who are saying one thing and then we're saying something else. And it's awful. So it's a journey. Like we're not talking about a strength block. We're talking about what are we doing now to phase in so that when we're 80, we could be train like Joan, who is deadlifting 200, right? She's amazing. I know. I love her too.
I want to meet her. She's my
Me
idol.
Too.
And I think she only started training, if I'm not mistaken, at 69 or 70. And she's maybe 75 or 77, something like that now. Yep. And she's phenomenal.
Yeah. Which shows you that you can build muscle and get super strong at any age.
Yes. Yes. It's like the best time was 10 years ago. And the second best time is today.
Is now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right now.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about the types of exercise selection. I'm asked about this a lot. It's like, tell me what your program is. It's like, my program is going to be different than your program. But are you, I tend to, when I'm talking about lifts and motor patterning, I tend to like compound lifts. I don't know. I tend to like to start with those in the workout. And then maybe as you get fatigued, if you're like, okay, I want to do a little glute pump or something, then I'm going to go do the little hip abduction or something like that at the end of the workout. What are your thoughts on compound movements? What are your thoughts on compound movements?
Oh, I'm all about compound movements, primarily because we get that whole functional strength and the bracing that comes with the compound movements.
Yeah.
That's so important because people think that doing ab work means sit-ups or leg lifts or, some hollow arches or something like that. But when we're looking at compound movements, your body learns how to brace against that load as well as work the whole body in your squat or your hinge motion in your deadlift, because we have to brace and use all of the muscles. And that's something that's not explained, especially to women who are just getting into it, because I'll always get the questions of, well, I did deadlifts, but now what do I do about my triceps? Should I do some tricep kickbacks and were you not, like pulling and bracing and using your lats and trying to bend the bar?
Your arms are dead after deadlifts.
Yeah, your arms are dead.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I was like, it's the fastest, most effective means of getting total body strength. And it's not like you go in and do squats every day. Compound movement, one might be a knee focus, lower body, which would be your whole squat focus on a Monday. And then maybe on Wednesday, we're doing upper body push pull overhead. So you're doing your bench, you're doing your bent over row, you're doing your push press. So you're doing all of the upper body planar push pull motion. And then on a Thursday or Friday, you're doing posterior hinge motion, which might be your deadlifts or your hip thrust or your single leg RDLs or something to that effect. But yes, start with the heavy lift first, and then you can go into the higher rep, more, I guess it's more singularly focused movement towards the end of your workout.
Yeah, I love to do that because my focus is the best at the beginning of the workout. My freshness, if you will, is the best at the beginning of the workout. So my execution of those more technical lifts, I find deadlifts and squats to be the most difficult technically. Maybe a pull-up comes after that, but I find most people do both of those two moves wrong. And certainly there's lots of variations of squats, lots of variations of deads as well. But I find that technique is so key, and I like to be fresher when I'm doing them. I was doing back just the other day, and for the pull-up, the bar at the top where the cables are, someone was using the cable, so I couldn't do my pull-ups. And so I went and I did some other lat exercise while I was waiting for it to clear up. And then I went did my pull-ups, which are usually the first thing that I do when I do back, is I do like 3 or 4 sets of pull-ups. And it was so different. Like I could not
hard. Yeah.
It was after I had sort of pre-fatigued my lats. So I'm like, all right, now I'll go and do 6 pull-ups. And I punched out 4. Like I couldn't do it. It was keeps me humble.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also I was already fatigued after doing that. So that technique tends to suffer the more tired you are, like that, even though, you can talk about, like you've talked about, like priming the nervous system, and you have the catecholamines and the cortisols, but you're still tired. Like, for me, my abs are usually sore after I do pull-ups, and they're actually also sore after doing deads as well. Like that bracing, that expansion, that intra-abdominal pressure that you need to sort of keep you upright as you're coming down in that hinge. Which actually, if I can just say, this is one thing that social media I do get very upset at, is this idea that for women in particular, and I would love your opinion on this if you've noticed this, and maybe I'm just sensitive to it, I don't know, but sometimes you'll see sort of fitness influencer types who are doing, let's say, a squat or a deadlift, and their stomachs are like sucked right in. It's like you have to increase your intra-abdominal like your stomach has to expand. It's never going to be flat through the entire movement. And I don't know why that irks me. There's probably something that I need to heal with that, but it's like your stomach cannot always be sucked all the way in all the time. Like you need to be able to breathe. Like your diaphragm needs to be able to depress,
Yeah. When I look at that, I'm like, you're not lifting heavy enough. If you can keep your stomach
right, yes.
sucked in, and you're not using and engaging your whole core for that lift, then you're not lifting heavy enough.
Yeah. Good. Great. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about techniques. A couple things I love to talk about online is tempo. Playing around with tempo, again, something that's not done well, but it's a way, I feel this is a way to progressively overload. If you are used to doing 1 count down on the squat and then 1 count up, if you all of a sudden take that descent and you extend the eccentric phase of it, that becomes a much harder squat. There's a lot more mechanical tension there.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about how you feel about eccentric loading, maybe even pausing or the stretch position, long length partials. Nerd out with me. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'm very much in that right now because I am trying to rehab from a massive knee injury. So I'm like, okay, I I really need to get posterior chain super strong because it occurred in a sled pull into a run. So I have a distal hamstring tear and a very messed up meniscus. So I've been playing around with eccentric and I've been playing around with isometrics. When you do the combination of those two, you get super strong, but you don't get so swole, which is okay. I don't mind. Because when we're looking at the eccentric, I try to tell people it's like if you're climbing a ladder and someone grabs your feet and pulls you down, right? And you're like, so if we are able to hold on to the top of the ladder for a longer period of time, then the essential jerk down isn't as damaging. So when we start doing a longer, slower drop in a squat, or we're doing a very slow pull up in the deadlift in a pause, then we are able to tax those muscle fibers at a longer time and tension without essentially damaging. We will get damage, of course, because the eccentric is very painful, but it's not a severe rip. And when we're looking at what we're doing, if we're always doing a one down and a one up, we're not really maximizing the full extent of how we can really get those muscle fibers to get strong and really stress resilient. So I love the tempo. I love lots of eccentric sets, and I've been doing eccentric right into a single leg hamstring isometric. And that is something that is very painful but effective.
It's like I'm talking to my best friend. Yes, I totally agree with you. I think the other thing that I have found I've just fallen in love with is when I am nearing failure. So I'm approaching failure and now a full range of motion is no longer possible for me. But I still have a little bit of juice. Like I still have a little bit of juice left. I just can't do, for example, like on a seated leg curl with hamstring or a lying leg curl, where I can't do the full range of motion anymore. A long length partial where you are keeping it stretched, but you only have partial ROM, like you only have partial range of motion, is such a wonderful finisher. It's such a wonderful way to really bring the muscle even closer to failure because I still have a little bit of I can still do a little bit more, just I can't do a full range of motion anymore. Those long length partials are a beautiful way to finish a set, I find. Have you tried that or are you trying that in your rehab at all? Yeah.
Yeah. So Tim McGrath is a really well-known physio from Australia, and he came over and did a clinic that my physio was at, and I missed it because I was overseas. But his new thing is doing long partials at the start and at the finish of an eccentric set.
Oh, long partials at the start and at the finish. Oh, I got to look that up. I got to try that actually. That sounds amazing. Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah. I mean,
you'll love it though.
It's all, but then, I was saying this to you before we got going, like I got into weight training. Like I, competed in figure, another lifetime ago. And I got in for totally aesthetics. I was like, I want to look good in a bikini. But why I stayed was for the mental resilience that it gives me. So it's certainly physical resilience, absolutely. But also I am able to have more capacity in other areas of my life, as a mother, as a wife, as a, in my work. And so I stay for the mental grit that it gives me. And I feel proud. Like after doing, my gosh, if I started with start with long length partials, then do full ROMs and then finish with long length and I will be so proud of myself at the end of that. I'm like, you did it. Like that was hard and you can do hard things,
Yes, exactly.
And so I think sometimes we just need to show ourselves. I mean, I find fitness is especially with weight training and even with the high intensity interval training and the sprint interval training that we've been talking about, these are psychologically very difficult because you're voluntarily putting yourself in discomfort. And I think that you develop a certain love and reverence for yourself that the world tells you as a woman that you should just not have.
Right.
Because otherwise what good are you if you're not consuming the bag that tells you you're the it girl or the mascara that tells you, well, now that your eyelashes touch your forehead, you're the center of attention or, whatever. Right. So, but it gives you, and I say this, kind of tongue in cheek, but also really, fitness really has given me a sense of who I am, like what I'm capable of. And it's like, I am much stronger than many people and situations in my life gave me credit for, or that I had even given myself credit for.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And we are now in a global society where no one wants to be uncomfortable. We have created an environment where we're really creating a catabolic system for our entire being. If you go into a room that's air conditioned and there's water readily available and nibbles at the back of the room, and you're sitting listening to a lecture or something, those are all things that are not conducive to pushing the body to adapt to being a better physiological. I'm not necessarily talking psychological in person. I'm saying from a physiological standpoint, we are creating an environment that just degrades our body.
yeah, I mean, this is another tangent, like just another conversation entirely. But I do think, to your point, I think that the word stress has become a dirty word. Even cortisol, dirty word. It's like, you know
Dirty
what?
word.
Cortisol, it's not this evil hormone that's trying to do you dirty. Like, there's a role for it, you know. It's like
Exactly.
so I love what you're saying. I think there's there's eustress and there's distress. There's good stress, there's bad stress. There's, chronic low grade stress and inflammation, and then there's acute stress, right? So yeah, okay.
Let's do more acute stress and recover from it.
Exactly. Okay. So speaking of recovery, okay. So finishing off the strength training, and then I actually do want to talk to you about recovery. How do you know when it's time for a deload, or when it's time, and for the audience, if you've never heard of that term before, either reducing your volume or intensity at the gym? I have kind of my own sort of heuristic, like I have sort of a little checklist when I'm like, okay, I think I've like accumulated enough systemic fatigue here. That's been like this amount of time and I'm seeing this in the gym. Do you do you schedule in your deloads? How do you know when you need to be taking a break from the gym?
For me, I'm different because I schedule my deloads when I have to travel overseas.
Okay.
So I'm not
That's
overly
convenient.
stressed,
Yeah.
right? So I'm not overly stressed about it. But when we're talking about a deload specifically, women tend to keep going and doing the same thing over and over, right? And they don't ever pick up a heavier load. Mentally, they check out and they're just going through the motions. It's like, okay, well, let's really let's look for 2 weeks and be very focused and very specific on what we're doing so that you are present for every lift that you're doing, you're present for every sprint that you're doing, and how you show up for the rest of your life. So let's keep track of that for 2 weeks and let's see how you feel. If we get to a third week and you can still do the same without checking out and you feel like you can add more load, great. But the fourth week, we're going to call it. We're going to bring you right back down because we want you to maintain that feeling you had for those first 2 weeks so that you can show up with intent for everything that you're doing. Because the mental load, I don't think people really recognize. The mental and central nervous system load of lifting and sprints is really strong. And if you don't fully recover from that, you get this accumulation where then you just check out. So when we start teaching women in particular to kind of become resilient and understand what it means to show up and give it all for each session that they're doing and still have the energy for the rest of their life to be a good mom or a partner or a CEO of a business or a physician in a busy clinic, all of those things, and have that stress resilience, that's what works. It's when you start failing on those different points where you're like, okay, we need to really bring everything back down so the whole body can recover, because we're doing this to improve ourselves and we are part of the rest of our life. So when women are really like, okay, I got to the third week and I'm really starting to check out and I don't really want to do my deadlifts on a Thursday, and usually I show up and I love them, then we're like, okay, deload time.
And is that the same for a woman who's in her fertile years, who's regularly menstruating, versus someone who's perimenopausal? Or do we make it tighter for a perimenopausal or menopausal woman? Or is there a difference between the two cohorts?
You have a little bit more leeway and better recovery when you're in your reproductive years because you have your hormones working for you. When we get to perimenopause, it's very much an individual because every woman's journey in perimenopause is different. So I try to hold that 2 weeks and then we can tweak it the next time. But there are some women who are like, no, I want to keep going, I want to keep going. And that's when I have to go, nope, no more than 3 weeks in a row, because ideally you're just so used to that more and more and more, and I want to pull you back. So when they start learning the pullback is where they get the full recovery, then they can go in and hit it hard again and polarize their training. Like, oh, this is what you mean by polarize. This is what it means to show up being recovered to be able to progress. It's like, yes, that's what I mean. Because you've spent so many years of just moderate go, 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 and just kind of hating what you're doing, not really engaged. And I want to reteach that. I want to reteach what it means to show up and to have that polarized training and to have the energy to do the harder sessions without really smashing yourself and feeling awful.
I had a comment on Instagram the other day. It was a woman who had just she was like, I'm new to strength training. I've been strength training for about a year and I use 8-pound weights like consistently. And I was like, okay, all the love to you. You know, like, I'm so proud of you for starting, right? Like, cause we got to meet people where I was like, so proud, but you can lift more than 8 pounds at this point, right? If you've been doing this for a year, I am confident. And I have never met you. And I'm not giving you advice over Instagram, but I am confident that if you went to the gym, you could lift up more than 8 pounds, right? And I do think that there's what I'm finding, because I like to talk about building muscle as well. And I find that there is it's still, I find it takes different forms. It sort of morphs, but the underlying theme is still there. It's, I don't want to get too big. I don't want to get bulky. And it sort of takes the form, and I say this with love because I do Pilates. I love Pilates. It has been fabulous for my pelvic floor as a mom who birthed an 8-pound 3 and a 9-pound 1 child. I love Pilates. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
But I find that it is morphed. I find that it's like this very, like the matcha latte and the matching light pink outfit and the little 1-pound weight around the ankles and the wrists. That's sort of like little, like I'm going to be little and I'm going to be, I hate the word, but I'll just air quote it, toned. We're going to be toned. We're not going to have visible muscle. Yeah. It is one of the hills I will die on. It's like 98% of the female population cannot get bulky unless they are taking exogenous, whatever. They're taking some kind of, androgens or something, or some like aromatase inhibitor, or, something like Anavar or whatever. There are some people that can, sure. There are some, there are some outliers. There's outliers in every rule is made to be broken. But for most of us, it's like, you're not going to play soccer and be like, you know what? I think I'm better than Ronaldo. That's just, it's not going to happen. You're not going to, like, I know when I'll quote it to, I think it's Lane Norton who says it. He's like, you're not going to like drive your car to the grocery store and be like, you know what? I think I'm an F1 driver. It's not,
I know.
it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
And it's like, I have been lifting. So I competed, when I was 2008, I competed. So however many years ago that was. So I've been lifting for decades. And it's like, it hasn't happened yet. And I work almost to failure. Like, I try to approximate failure. And it's like, it's like a gal can continue to dream. But this myth, it's one of the hills I'd like to die on. It's like, I would like to be able to say at the end of my career that I helped women dispel this myth that if they, and I had a strong woman on my podcast and she was like, do you know what the word bulky means? I was like, no. And she's like, it means to take up space.
Yeah.
I was like, huh. And why do we not want to take up space? We just want to be little dainty flowers. It's like, no, I want
no, we
strong.
Don't.
No, we don't. No, we don't.
I tell people and teach people who come to my youth seminars, and I tell the girls who are coming in, I was like, you want to be able to be confident and take up space. Don't apologize for taking up space. You go into a gym, you own that lifting platform. Don't let anyone push you off because you're only 15. It's like, own it. And I'm so tired of the rhetoric that women need to eat less and be small, because that is doing nothing for us as women, as population, or confidence, or for any of us to move forward and be empowered. It's like, I'm with you. I want to die on the hill of telling women, look, let's get strong and let's take up space.
Let's talk a little bit about nutrition, since you brought it up so beautifully. And maybe we can talk about it as it relates to the exercise that we've been talking about, the cardiovascular training and the strength training. One of the comments that I often hear, I put a post up, maybe it's a couple months ago now, it was like a little meme, and maybe it's a little bit of a dark meme, but my hair is not the only dark thing about me. Sometimes my heart is dark too. I put up a meme, and it was like a Star Wars meme. If you were a Star Wars fan, it was like Kylo Ren, and he was in the movie, he was about to kill his father, and he's like, I know what I need to do. So I took that scene. It's like, I know what I need to do. And then it was like, eat before I work out, And it's
Yes.
like, so, and then people were like, oh, I can't believe, but I work out at 5 a.m. Like, I can't believe, and like, whatever. So talk to me about pre-exercise fuel. What do we need to be considering? What macros? Do we need to be thinking about electrolytes, protein, carbs? What does it look like? And for the woman who needs to work out, and as I do, sometimes I don't, like, my kids have soccer practice. I only have like a certain window in the morning to get my workout in. Sometimes it does feel heavy to eat prior to. So what do you say to that woman who's like, listen, the constraints of my life are such that I can only work out this time. So what do I do before? And if I don't like eating, what are the alternatives?
Yep. I hear this all the time. And I get a lot of emails saying, what about the 5 a.m. club? What do we do? Why can't I work out fasted? So I bring it back down to when we look at female data and female research, we see that fasting, if we do a fasted workout, for the most part, when women are doing fasted training, it's either because they don't want to eat because it's so early, or they bought into the idea that if I do fasted training, I'm going to burn more fat during the session and I'm going to end up eating less calories. So it's a calorie deficit. When we look at the data, this is not true. Yes, we'll burn more fat, but the repercussions of fasted training post-exercise. So we have a perturbation in our appetite hormones. The hypothalamus is now going, hey, wait, there wasn't nutrition coming in for this session. So we, one, have a circadian shift. So we see that sleep gets delayed because we see circadian rhythm is reset, light and dark, and food. So if you're doing exercise without food, then we have a phase shift of when our melatonin is released at night for good sleeping. But more acutely, we see that when you're doing fasted training with this appetite perturbation from the hypothalamus, that women tend to end up moving less during the day. So we don't fidget as much. We don't incidentally move as much. And we end up craving more simple carbohydrate and eating more of the simple carbohydrate. So it completely moots the point of women going, I want to burn more calories and burn more fat. Because now at rest, our body's craving more simple carbs and we're not moving as much. So it ends up not helping at all. We also see from Abby Smith-Ryan's lab out of UNC that women, Abby.
Yeah, I just interviewed her.
Yeah. So women who are going to be doing a HIIT session and or strength session, if they have only 15 grams of protein before, it ends up fueling the workout better so they can hit intensities and have a better overall stress response, what we're after. And it also extends our EPOC, our excessive post-oxygen consumption, so elevated metabolism, and we end up using more free fatty acids at rest. So just by having that little bit of protein before about a 45-minute session, we are now appeasing the hypothalamus that there is some nutrition coming in. We don't have a perturbation in our appetite hormones, and everything is elevated, and we end up using more free fatty acids at rest, craving less simple carbohydrates, and end up sleeping better. And it all feeds forward to just a little bit of nutrition before you work out. So when I get questions from the 5 a.m. club, I'm like, I'm right there with you. Like, I have to get up and get a session done because, then I got to get my kid out the door, and then we have a long day of work, all that kind of stuff. So this is where the protein coffee comes in that I think went viral. And it doesn't even have to be that. It can be a couple of tablespoons of yogurt with a little bit of honey. It could be half a banana. It could be a little bit of a protein drink. Could be protein water. It's just as long as you're getting some food in before, maybe 150 calories at the most. So it's nothing that's going to make you overly full, but it is enough to bring your blood sugar up. It's enough to bring some circulation of glucose and amino acids so that the hypothalamus is like, sweet, we've got this. There's some nutrition. We can do this exercise, and I don't have to start downturning my appetite hormones and start really trying to create a conservation effect by making the brain thinks it needs more glucose when it doesn't.
I mean, I have a cappuccino, and I have a high protein, it's a Fairlife, the brand is Fairlife,
Yeah.
no affiliation, but it has like 14 grams of protein for, I think it's a cup. And that's how much I use to make my cappuccino. And then I have a question for you actually, because one of the things that I have found is I'll have a cappuccino, but then what I also do is I take some ketones. So I am someone who, when I'm working out early in the morning, on the weekends it's a different story, right? I can get in a meal, maybe even 2 meals before I get to the gym, and I'm fed, and my joints are warmed up. It's a beautiful thing on the weekend, but during the week, like you, the constraints of life are such that I can only get a workout in early in the morning. And I just interviewed Brianna Stubbs at the Buck Institute, and she's looking at ketones. And we were talking about, and I was telling her sometimes I'll take it, like if I can't stomach like protein, if I can't have the protein in the oats in the morning, or it's too early or whatever, I'll have my cappuccino and then I'll have ketones. And so she was talking about this idea that ketones seem to help with muscle retention, and they are anti-catabolic. So again, for a perimenopausal woman, this is one of your number one goals, is to preserve the muscle that you have, ideally add to it, preserve the strength that you have, ideally add to it as you're aging powerfully. What do you think about ketones? Have you looked at that? Is there any difference? And I asked her about female metabolism. She's like, great question. We don't have the data.
We don't have the data on that. Right.
Yeah.
So when I look at ketones from a supplemental standpoint, we see that it's used as fuel. So you can look at it as it's used as fuel, just like amino acids. So it could be protein, water, or ketones. Ketones are preferentially used, again, by the brain for delaying fatigue. Yeah. So if we're looking at using it, it is just reducing the overall catabolic stress that occurs during exercise. So this is why we see the feed forward of better muscle function, because we're having support for central nervous system. We're also having support for metabolism. So if you're doing protein and then your ketones during, ketones are great, especially if you're not doing a long, slow stuff or high intensity metabolic work. So the strength work, and however hard that is supported through the use of the exogenous ketones.
Fantastic. And then post-workout, do you feel like there's a certain, I know that the anabolic window, my understanding anyway, is as long as you're getting enough protein and carbohydrates in a 24-hour period, that, the fabled, 15-minute window after you work out is not really valid. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? What are your thoughts on post-exercise fueling?
So from a protein standpoint, I agree with it. Right. We can see that as long as we get enough protein throughout the day, then we're going to stay in an anabolic situation. The caveat is when we're looking at coming back down to baseline from a euglycemic standpoint, or, our blood glucose coming back down to baseline. We see that women's baseline response comes back down within 60 to 80 minutes. And so we have a smaller window to be able to repair and replace our carbohydrate and effectively our glycogen. And what helps with the carbohydrate uptake is protein. Mm-hmm. So if we're able to have an eating opportunity post-exercise with protein and carbohydrate, not only are we refueling and repairing our muscle, we are also reducing the incidence of low energy availability, because women tend not to eat enough. And so if we use post-exercise as a really fantastic eating opportunity, and it doesn't have to be a full meal, if you're getting your protein carbohydrate combination, maybe it's just your protein shake because you're not that hungry, it opens up the ability to reduce any kind of risk for low energy availability, which is something we don't want to get into. And it also shuts down that catabolic response, because a lot of women will delay food intake because they don't feel that hungry. And yes, we aren't necessarily compromising muscle protein synthesis, but we are exacerbating catabolism. We're exacerbating the muscle breakdown.
Yes. Yeah.
And so when I get into arguments with some of the people on social media, when they're like, there's no sex difference in post-exercise, there's no window of opportunity, it's like, if you're looking just at muscle protein synthesis, I'll agree with you. We look at the holistic aspect of what's happening in a woman's body, I disagree. And this is the research that backs up that disagreement.
I love that you're saying this because I have seen even with menstrual cycle change, like fluctuations in motor coordination and energy output across the menstrual cycle. I can't I've had thousands of women tell me that they are different in the luteal phase versus in the follicular phase. And then you'll have guys that'll say, well, the meta-analysis shows that there's no difference.
I'm so frustrated with that. Yeah. Yeah.
It's it's like, first of all, you know what women love? When men tell them that there's no changes. There's no changes in how they feel across the men. Like, women love that. Like, please mansplain it to me a little bit more. So that's the first little, maybe that's a little catty, that's a little silly,
No.
but I understand that you're looking for, in a meta-analysis, you're looking for a very strong signal to emerge. But hormones they speak in whispers, so how are we going to bring out a strong signal when we have this this ever changing milieu of hormones that we're marinating in, and you're picking out one point in time in one menstrual cycle, maybe if you have like a 4-week study on whatever variable you're trying to prove. And the other thing I'll say before I will give you the floor here is that I feel like this is, well, maybe I'll give you the floor. I'll let you comment on that, and then I'll make my next point.
Okay. Menstrual cycle research right now is so politically polarizing within the sports science research, because you have one group that is all about the meta-analyses and an N of 12 where there's no difference between any phase of the menstrual cycle.
Right.
It's like, okay.
Right. Yeah.
But you are completely ignoring the fact that all that research is done on supposedly eumenoric white women. When you're looking at athletes, it is a rarity to find a true eumenoric woman. So all these points in the luteal phase that say there's no difference is probably not true luteal phase. There's probably no progesterone circulating around in there, but they still have a bleed because an ovulation still has a bleed. So we have to look at the data that these meta-analyses are digging into. And then we also look at some of the studies of an N of 10 or 12 in the population there. And was it really done with a proper methodology where, yes, we see this pinpoint and there is estrogen surge and we can track these hormones, but no, because they're just one point in time. So the other layer that is not involved in any of this research is the sociocultural or the psychological aspect of what the menstrual cycle does. So if someone feels bulletproof on day 22 of their menstrual cycle and it's in the luteal phase and they're told, oh, no, you're supposed to not be able to do anything. They're like, but yes, I can. Excuse the data, right? So then that's not included. Or someone who feels absolute crap on day 3 of their menstrual bleed, but everyone else starts to feel better, then that's not included either. So there's so many different variations within what we should be looking at. And there are definitive groups within the menstrual cycle research. There's a whole group of us, and I'm putting myself in that category, that is looking at the holistic aspect of, yes, we can't determine if this is luteal phase deficiency or not, because we don't have the adequate means of tracking progesterone. We also have to look at where this person grew up. Did they grow up in a culture where menstrual cycle wasn't talked about and we didn't talk about bleeding? Or did they grow up in a culture where everyone's like, yeah, period power? And how does that make them feel when they have their bleed or not? So it comes back to the individual variation. And then you have the other group that's like, nope, sorry, there's no evidence. It's like, your lack of evidence doesn't mean there isn't an effect. It just means the signal isn't strong enough to show you an effect.
Yeah. Lack of evidence is not evidence of lack.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. This is again, one of the things that you've articulated this beautifully, because I struggle. Honestly, I struggle with this because I hang my hat on the Church of Science. It's like PubMed is like, I love to go through PubMed. Right. And so when I see meta-analyses like that, I'm like, this is not lining up with my clinical experience, right? So there's when we think about evidence-based medicine, I sort of think of 3 overlapping. It's like a Venn diagram. There's like what's available in the literature, which is often lacking and behind by anywhere from 10 to 20 years, but whatever's available in the literature. Then you have like the clinical experience of the doctor or the coach or the the practitioner, the provider. And then the other circle is the patient desires. So I don't like these, maybe we'll call them like evidence-based trolls that will just say, well, there's no RCT. Like there's the meta-analysis is like, it's like, you have never seen a patient. I have seen tens of thousands of patients. And I can tell you definitively after 19 years in clinical practice, there is a signal. there is a difference. There is a difference.
Yes.
So, okay. I wanted to ask you about appetite. Now I'm like, okay.
Now we know that we are kindred souls now through this whole entire conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about appetite across the menstrual cycle, because one of the things that I come across is, and I notice this myself, like period comes, I have no appetite. So I have to work. I have to make sure that I am getting enough fuel, because I can very easily go for hours without eating and I can undereat. What do you want to counsel women, whether they're in their menstrual cycle or perimenopause, where they're still menstruating, but it is becoming a little bit more unpredictable? What do you want to tell women about appetite as a signal for when to eat? Do we want to listen solely to appetite? Does that change in perimenopause? And how do we want to think about this? And we were talking about circadian rhythm a little bit before, but how does that square up with, circadian biology?
Yeah, there's so many women that are disconnected from what it means to be hungry. And because everyone's been told, oh, you shouldn't eat and you should only eat at this certain time. And there's a massive disconnect of what it means to be hungry. I've taught a lot of women what it means by playing around with, okay, I want you to have fuel for training and then lunch, and then I don't want you to have anything until dinner, and tell me how you feel in the afternoon. What are your energy levels? Are you thirsty? Are you tired? So then we can find their cues for appetite. When we start looking at appetite, there is definitely a variation across the menstrual cycle. We see that progesterone's job is to build tissue. So your appetite is going to be more elevated when you do ovulate and have progesterone. You have around a 12% increase in protein needs. We see you need more carbohydrate, because the carbohydrate that you are eating gets shuttled to the endometrial lining. And then when your hormones drop and you're not trying to build tissue, your appetite gets muted because your body's like, I don't need as much now. So when we get into those situations, it's more about, okay, we know that we need to fuel for the task at hand, and that's during the day. So we want to eat within a half an hour of waking up because of our cortisol awakening response. We kind of want to just blunt it a bit so that we have better responses of cortisol throughout the day. And then eat at regular intervals, preferably protein and fiber. And when we're getting into that habit, regardless of menstrual cycle phase or regardless of perimenopausal status, when you start getting into a habit and a timing, people just kind of gravitate and like, okay, yep, it's time to eat. So it's those little reminders of, okay, have I eaten within the past couple hours? No. Am I hungry? Maybe, but I know that I will be in an hour, so I'll thwart that by having it. And it is hard to reteach women what it means to be hungry, because we've been in that situation where like always saying, no, I'm not hungry. I don't need it. No, I don't need it. But now that we're in this environment, and I love this environment, where eat more to lose weight, eat more to build muscle. Mm-hmm. And we're really trying to hammer the idea that more quality food is better for you. Now I have women say, I can't eat enough. How do I get all of this in? So then we have to look at how do we strategically start increasing food intake across the day. And so it's an interesting time for sure.
I love that. That's so great. And and the other question I have around appetite, you mentioned carbohydrates a couple of times as they're synergistic in terms of being able to shuttle into the muscle. One of the things I find, and I will take some responsibility here as well for my contribution here, is we have to heal our relationship with carbohydrates. I'll just say it that way. I think that women are just deathly afraid of it. And so I used to follow a stricter ketogenic diet. I would actually periodize it with the menstrual cycle. So there were times where it was higher carb, usually luteal phase, higher protein, second half of the cycle, but still and I still stand by it for women with like, when we're metabolic dysfunction, type 2 diabetes, kind of clawing back on carbohydrates temporarily, highlight, double underline, temporarily is a good way to kind of reset. What I found though, and I could not predict this, I don't think I could have predicted it, is what I saw women doing was they were like, oh, I've lost all this water weight. I have all this like dopamine and energy and drive again. I feel great. It was the carbs all along. That was the problem. And so they perseverate on that. So once they've sort of ridden out the maximal utility of a ketogenic diet, let's say, or a fasting protocol or whatever, they stay there and they don't move on and they don't add carbs back into the diet because they have this death fear that they are going to go right back to where they were and all of that. So what is your thought process, or maybe what are some of the things that you counsel your clients around healing our relationship with carbohydrates? Because that is I love the 1 gram of protein per, pound of body weight. I actually think it should be the same for carbs. And I think, Abby Smith Ryan, she was actually like, I think it needs to actually be 2 to 1.
Yeah.
But I don't know if the world is ready for that yet,
They're not ready for that yet. No.
Yeah. So what do you say about that? What are your thoughts?
I bring it down to the gut microbiome because we see what is the essential food for our gut. And it's getting, like, the gut microbiome is getting more and more press through research as well as popular press. And we see a distinctive change in the diversity as we hit perimenopause, where there's a significant decrease in the diversity. So when I talk about helping our gut microbiome, I'm like, we need to eat lots of colorful fruits and veg, and we have to look at a lot of sprouted grains and other ancient grains, which, yes, is carbohydrate, but it doesn't have the same impact on your blood sugar and all of our hormone responses as if we're looking at the ultra-processed carbohydrates. I find it really interesting being an expat living in a different country where we don't have a wide variety and really cheap food. We're more the seasonal growing, and New Zealand's very small. And so when I get to the States and I go into a grocery store, I'm like, no wonder people are confused what it is, because there's rows and rows and rows of things that supposedly is food, but I wouldn't eat any of it because I can't identify what that is. It's so ultra processed. So when we start bringing it back down to, we want to take care of the gut microbiome, and we need carbohydrate for that, from the stance of fiber in the carb, as well as looking at, as we're fueling, we need to have a really good control of our blood sugar. If we are not having a good control of our blood sugar, we actually can't fuel our exercise. So we start to get over the carb phobe by first introducing more veggies. And then I feel like I have a big win when someone will actually eat a piece of toast. Yeah. I'm like, oh, look at that. You're eating some toast. That's fantastic.
Yeah. I actually just put a post up today as of this recording on my recipe for sourdough bread. Like, this was one thing that I picked up in the pandemic. I was like, I'm going to start my own starter bread, starting my own sourdough starter and learning how to make it. And this is my treat to my family. And we do it once a week. And, we make that sort of ball, that big sourdough ball once a week. And it's, it's gone in a day or two, but it's a delight. I love to have it with my morning, avocados and omelet and whatever I'm having for the morning. So great. Okay, so veggies first. So veggies and then fruit. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely fruit. Okay, so I'm glad. Yes, we are very, very much on the same page. There are people that think that fruit is not.
It's high sugar.
Yes, the fructose and it's just, I can't, it's like, people don't eat enough vegetables and fruit as it is, so now we have these guys that don't have shirts on in the grocery store telling us, look, kale is trying to kill you, and like now your blueberries are causing your fatty liver disease. It's like, guys,
I know, like, what are you talking about?
No.
I know. I ascribe to the 30 plants a week. Like, I try to get people to look at 30 different plants a week. And that can be herbs and spices, but also all the other things. If you can have a variety of plants during the week, you're pretty good. And fruit is definitely part of those plants.
And supplements. I know that I'm watching our time. It's like we've already flown by, I have not gotten to 4 different categories of things that I wanted to ask you, but let's talk about supplements for women. Menstrual years, perimenopausal years, menopausal years. Does it change over that arc of time?
It does. The one mainstay, of course, is creatine. I'm so excited that creatine is getting the big push that it is at the moment for health, especially when we start talking about brain health, heart health, gut health, and all of the perturbations that people have, especially women with heart and brain and gut. So creatine monohydrate for the win. When we're looking at the reproductive years, a lot of women have issues with iron and iron absorption, and their ferritin is often on the low end of normal. When you're an active woman and you compare it to the normal ranges, I get a little bit antsy because the general population is getting sicker. So the general ranges are changing, because when we're looking at the recommendations and the norms They're based on the general population. So when women are in their reproductive years and their ferritin sits below 50, like we need to look at supplementing because we need to look at how iron is essential for so many different functions rather than just red blood cells. The other one is vitamin D3 because we spend a lot of time inside. And if we're outside in the summer, sunscreen and hats and covering up is a big thing. And a lot of women are deficient in vitamin D3. So if we're looking at let's increase that, then we also see how D3 is so essential for so many different functions in the body. The one change I would make for peri and postmenopause is omega-3 fatty acids. Because when we start seeing omega-3 and how it works on a cellular level to help with oxidative and inflammatory properties, peri and postmenopausal women need that boost in omega-3s. We see it's not as dire when we're in our reproductive years as it is when we start getting older.
And do you have recommendations? So for vitamin D, are you looking at 4,000, 5,000 international units, or what is the range? Do you have a range that you typically like to see women supplementing with?
So I look at where they are in the world, like down in the southern hemisphere, because summertime we have the big ozone hole. I'll tell people, bring your vitamin D intake down a little because you are getting sun exposure. So instead of sitting at 4,000, we'll go down to 2,000. And in the wintertime, I'm like, you know what? If you're not using creatine for mood, we also need vitamin D for mood. So we're looking at the 5,000. And in the States, it's a little bit different depending on how close you are to southern versus northern and what. So it does vary between 2,000 and 5,000 depending on where the woman is, color of skin, sun advantageous exposure or not. So it is a little bit of a tricky point.
And creatine, would you say 5 milligrams is the minimum, 10 milligrams? What would be 5 grams. Sorry, grams. 5 grams as a minimum for muscle health.
Yep.
And would you go up to 10 when you're thinking about brain and heart or 5?
So
the
newer,
like 5?
I like 5. I have women phase in if they've never used any kind of supplement where we start with 1.5 for the first week, then we move up to 3 the second week, and then we move up to 5. Because by the end of the third week, your body's fully saturated. So that's a good way of really staging the saturation. When we get into times of depression and low sleep, high fatigue, that's when I'm 2 times 5 grams a day. So morning and evening. And then for women who are highly stressed, traveling a lot, really busy, and perimenopausal, I'm like, let's just stay with the 2x5s because it supports brain and stress resilient and immune system.
Love that. And then for the omega-3s, is it 2 to 3 grams daily you're looking at? Or
yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. We are such kindred spirits, Stacy. This has been, I mean, I have to tell you, like I told you, Little Miss Overprepared. I have so many things that we didn't even get to. It's almost hilarious. I think we have to get you back. Hydration. I want to talk to you about hydration, recovery practices, sauna, cold water, rest days, asynchronous split. Oh my God, so much stuff in my notes. But
so many things. Yeah.
If you'd be willing, I'd love to invite you back on for part 2. But this is going to be so valuable for our community because we talk about similar themes on the podcast, and you have so beautifully and eloquently explained some of these differences. So thank you so much for your time today. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. And yes, I'll definitely do a part 2. It's super fun.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Stacy Sims. As we were talking about, I'm like, well, this is just my best friend. So my new best friend. I don't know if she knows that yet, but had a fantastic conversation with her. So many serendipitous alignments in terms of our philosophy around training and cardiovascular health and the way that we want to look at the sex specific differences between men and women. So a couple of highlights for me, some of my most favorite parts of our conversation is the part where she was maybe my nerd heart when she went on a little nerd safari on the difference of the implications of estrogen as we lose estrogen and the implications of that on strength. And she explained that phosphorylation, so if you remember from high school biology, if you remember myosin and actin, these are the two filaments that sort of cross over each other in order for the muscle to contract. Well, the myosin is under direct influence of estrogen. So as we are losing estrogen, we are now losing the power, the strength of that contraction. And so one of the things that she said that I really appreciated is that we often we still maintain our muscle mass, but we start to lose our strength. And this is, if you remember from the conversation, we were talking about type 2A and type 2B fibers. These are the type 2B fibers that start to degrade quite rapidly as we start to lose estrogen in perimenopause. So just loved that. I loved that she differentiated between high intensity interval training and sprint interval training. I thought that was a really important distinction between the two. And I loved our conversation on, gosh, there's so much I loved. I'm looking at my notes here. I loved our conversation on fasted performance when we are thinking about fasted cardio or fasted strength training and how that impacts performance in the gym or performance in that activity. And what is some of the research around pre-fueling? So I have shared with you and shared with Stacy that I often will have just like my cup of coffee with my cappuccino. So I'm getting some protein from the milk, but then I'll often supplement with ketones. So I really liked her suggestion around the protein coffee. That was that's going to be easy for most people. If you're already having an espresso or having, an Americano or whatever kind of coffee you're having, for you to blend in some protein powder into that. I think that that's fine. You can also add some creatine in there as well, because it doesn't taste like anything. And then the other piece that I loved was healing our relationship with carbohydrates. I think Stacy and I are there's a couple of hills that we're going to die on, and maybe even together. And that is that carbohydrates, we need to heal our relationship with carbohydrates. And the other thing that we didn't discuss that I'll just say that I really appreciated was the conversation around periodization. So she was talking about, I asked her about deloads, and I sort of have a general heuristic in my mind about when I think I need a deload. And I unknowingly described exactly what I had described in my first book, The Betty Body. So really thinking about periodizing around 3 weeks and then taking the next week off. And that's actually exactly what I had described in my first book. So I was just tickled really to hear that she was able to articulate that unprompted. Obviously, I don't think she's read my book. So was just delighted with all the synergies that we had on the show. And let me know what you think. If you liked this conversation, there's definitely a part 2 to be had. As I was saying, I didn't get through like pages and pages of the questions that I did have for her, but let me know what you thought of this potential part 1. Leave us a review on Spotify or on Apple iTunes if you feel like this is providing you a lot of value and you want other Bettys just like you to get this information. So until next time, I bid you adieu, and thank you so much for being a listener.